Hello everyone, this is Crystal Racing here. 24 hours after that farce we saw at Spa-Francorchamps, I have gathered my thoughts and I'm going to give a measured response, about as measured as I ever could give. But here goes. After one lap was completed, half points were awarded to the top 10 of Verstappen, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Daniel Ricciardo, Sebastian Vettel, Pierre Gasly. Who finished 7th, was he? Yeah, but Leclerc finished 8th. TV 9th. Sainz finished 10th. We got half point. I apologise, I forgot for who finished 7th. But anyway, here's my points. Look. Oh yeah, it was Ocon who finished 7th. I beg your pardon. Yeah. To give out half points after just one lap completed is just ridiculous. For me, in order to hand out half points, I think at least 30% of the race needs to be completed before you consider giving out half points. So for Spa-Francorchamps, that's 14 laps that should have been completed. Now, of course, the issue here is of course, the fact that the FIA and all the drivers and teams felt like they just couldn't hold a race of any sort at all because the visibility was that bad. And it's also important to remember that this weekend, Lando Norris had a massive off at Eau Rouge during qualifying, and of course there was a pile-up in the W Series race. In similar, well, not quite as appalling conditions, but fairly bad rainy conditions as well. But that really does bring up quite a few questions, like, you know, the points that were given out, since of course one lap really is insufficient to declare a result. In my opinion, it should be at least 30% minimum race distance completed for half points, I beg your pardon, to be given out. But just in the same way, in order to give full points out, you have to have at least 75% of the race distance completed before you get to that stage. I argue that you could lower the threshold a bit for the full points being handed out to maybe just 70%, but that's just my opinion. And that's not really the issue we're talking about right now. I mean, yesterday we saw so many operational errors. There was not a single green flag lap that took place. I mean, Fernando Alonso, who finished 11th, called the decision shocking. Sebastian Vettel called it a joke. Lewis Hamilton called for the fans to be refunded. There was also confusion whether Sergio Perez, who had crashed out on his reconnaissance lap and was not able to take the original start, whether he should have been allowed to take what was the restart at, 6 o'clock local time. That was really confusing. And Michael Massey, I'm sorry, you have got to be held responsible, along with your buddies at the FIA and the stewards. What were you all doing, seriously? That was an absolute disaster, to be honest. I know it's not your fault that the rain lashed down as hard as it did, but, it did seem as if, like yesterday, it seemed as if the FIA and everyone involved were trying to constantly change the rules just to have a race. I mean, look, I have no problems with, cars starting races behind the safety car, and, in order to get a race going, or standing starts having to be banned in certain circumstances. That's not really something I have a problem with. The fact of the matter is we didn't have a single green flag lap, and the fact of the matter is at the start last week there was extremely appalling weather forecasted for the weekend that's just gone past at Belgium. And not only that, the Low Countries around Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg and Germany have had an unusually high amount of rain for this time of year. And it wasn't that long ago, about a month ago, there were a lot of floods around that part of the world. About 6 weeks ago, there was heavy rain and there were people having to leave their houses because their houses were flooded. How did we not see this coming? Come on, man. And yes, I know some people go on about, well, you know, the 2007 Japanese Grand Prix was held in similarly appalling conditions. So was the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. I'm not sure that's really a good excuse to compare it as to say we should have gone racing, but, you know, and I know there's also other people saying, you know, we could have ran the race on Monday, but of course the problem is, of course, the reason why IndyCar and NASCAR can do that is because, of course, the employment laws they have there, where I don't know what it is, but it does allow NASCAR IndyCar to delay a race till Monday due to the fact they have oval races, where of course you can't race in the rain on an oval track. And you've also got to realise Formula One is an international racing series, unlike IndyCar and NASCAR, which are both purely national series racing within America. So any sort of laws and legislations they have in place should be mostly consistent between state to state. I mean, okay, yes, I know there's some differences here and there, but, you know, Formula One is international, and, you know, it can get very complicated if you go and break a certain country's law, and, you know, and no one wants to be found guilty of negligence according to a certain country's law. And of course, you have to realise, you know, the marshals who are there at the track have jobs. They, you know, they give out their free time during the weekend. They have to travel back to wherever they live or whatever the hotel they have. They have to go back to work. So I mean, essentially, and of course the photographers and all the track workers and everyone who works around the track, you've got to compensate these people for, you know, essentially the fact they'll probably miss a day's work if a race was to be postponed to a Monday. And of course, Spa-Francorchamps, as we all know, as its safety track record has come into question. 2 years ago, Antoine Hubert was killed after a horrific crash at Eau Rouge where he collided with 2 or 3 other cars. I know a lot of people have talked about modifying the corner. Well, I mean, I don't know how exactly you can modify Eau Rouge, but, you know, I have to say that if racing at Spa-Francorchamps is this difficult, I argue that we probably shouldn't even hold races here anymore if we really do feel like you can't modify Eau Rouge and the track is too fast, because in some ways it is really fast now, especially with these cars, with the big wings, the fat slicks we've got in these cars. And, you know, I don't think Formula 2 are going to be having a race here for quite a while, just due to the fact that obviously what happened 2 years ago, and I think no one really wants to risk another horrific injury or even death in that series. So, and look, I know someone kept arguing me saying, well, it's tough that certain drivers struggled in qualifying and they deserve to be marked down for their performance rankings due to that, mate. We didn't have a race, okay? And we've seen it plenty of times where a driver qualifies badly only to completely pull out a brilliant result on Sunday. It's happened plenty of time in Formula 1, like, you know, Perez could have charged back through the field and finished 4th or 5th. I don't know, or Kimi Raikkonen's done it quite a few times. You know, Fernando Alonso's another one who's amazing, way better on Sunday than he is on Saturday. And as for George Russell's podium, and Latifi's 9th place, that's another 10 points for Williams. Alfa Romeo have almost no chance of finishing P8 unless a miracle occurs now. Unless a miracle occurs. We need at least 2 or 3 big fluke races to salvage P8 now. That's a lot of prize money that's gone away from the Alfa Romeo team for next year. These sort of decisions can cost a team's place in Formula 1 altogether. Okay, I know this might not be the best example, but 5 years ago, Manor was sitting in P10 leading up to the 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix, having scored a point at Austria with Pascal Wehrlein. But, of course, in that Brazilian race, Felipe Nasser finished 9th for Sauber, meaning that Sauber finished 10th in the constructor standings. Manor finished 11th, And because, of course, with prize money only being given to the top 10 teams, that meant that Manor received no prize money for that season and he went out of business. These decisions can cost the smaller teams their future in Formula 1. Now, I'm not saying that Alfa Romeo will go bankrupt because of this. No, Alfa Romeo are in a fairly decent financial predicament with the money coming in from Alfa Romeo and, of course, the guys who work with Marcus Ericsson who own the team. There's enough money to survive a P9 finish in the constructors' standings. But, I know this might sound a bit weird considering Haas have been so slow, but arguably this result could cost them as well. Since, of course, the most likely people to buy that team out is, of course, the Mazepin family. But, of course, there's always a chance of, for all we know, the Mazepins might decide not to even buy Haas for whatever reason, and Nikita Mazepin might decide he doesn't even want to be a Formula 1 driver after this year. You never know. I'm not saying that. That's a very unlikely outcome in itself, but you never know in Formula 1, okay? Now, of course, there's only 10 teams on the grid, but, we all know the prize money, the way the prize money system goes is the higher up you finish the table, the more money you receive. The lower you finish down the table, the less money you receive. And if you finish outside the top 10 when there's 11 or 12 teams on the grid, you don't receive a single penny. Yeah, it's that bad. And, this cannot happen again because, at some point later on in this year, we might have another race like at Cotra or Interlagos where there's another massive heavy downpour and the drivers and teams are like, we can't race. We really do need to think of a contingency plan of how to deal with this sort of stuff because what happened yesterday and last weekend was not acceptable. Not acceptable. I'm not claiming to be a genius of any sort, but we can't allow this sort of stuff. We need to do better as a sport, seriously. Lewis Hamilton, I know Kimi Räikkönen didn't give out a statement, but then Kimi Räikkönen never really gives out statements on anything, to be frankly honest. We also have to remember, of course, in the constructor standings, McLaren pulled 4.5 points clear of Ferrari in the constructors table. If McLaren finished 4.5 points ahead of Ferrari, or fewer than that, then Ferrari are probably going to protest today's result towards the end of this season. If Alfa Romeo finish within 10 or fewer points of Williams come the end of this season, they're going to protest today's result. And if Lewis Hamilton finishes 5 points or fewer behind Max Verstappen come the end of this season in this year's Drivers' Championship, Hamilton and Mercedes will protest today's result. Not today's result, yesterday's result. Sorry, I am seriously so angry I can't even string a coherent sentence anymore. I'm just going to pause the video for a bit. And let me make this absolutely clear. In my opinion, at 6 o'clock local time, at Belgium yesterday, there should have been a big decision coming from the FIA that should have been a big announcement saying the race will not restart, there will be no points awarded, there will be no result declared because the conditions were just simply too appalling to allow any racing to occur because since the fact they didn't do a single green flag lap, that really was the case. And yes, I know people will complain that we've raced in worse conditions and all that, but of course we are in 2021 and I know some people say, well, race control were unlucky with the circumstances. Mate, there needed to be a real brave decision from the FIA, but they didn't come up with it. Michael Massey didn't do it. And, look, I've also got to say something about Juan Manuel Correa. this weekend. This was the first time he'd visited Spa in 2 years. I'm not sure how he got on, but you know, of course, he was the guy who got seriously injured in a crash that killed Antoine Hubert. Thoughts go out to him, and of course, Hubert's family. I'm gonna look at what happened in the Formula 3 Championship. Manuel Correa, who is down in 20th place in the championship, finished all 3 races, but 22nd, 18th, 21st. Yeah, well, at least he got to the checkered flag in all 3 races, but, you know, it is what it is. I'm not going to really go into too much detail. Having looked at his results, I highly doubt he's got really a future in Formula 3 or Formula 2, really. I think he's probably going to be off doing something else after this year. Just frankly, I mean, his career's just not going to be in Formula 1 at all, frankly. But anyway, I mean, you know, we have to remember in qualifying, Vettel was calling for a red flag when Norris crashed. And, you know, and of course the podium ceremony, how could I forget that? The podium ceremony, why did we even have a podium ceremony? I know we had to go up there and present trophies, very hollow I've got to say, but why on earth did he spray champagne? There was... It just didn't make any sense to be having spray... Well, not the champagne, sparkling wine as it is now. I don't know what on earth they spray on the podiums these days, but... I mean, you know, Lewis Hamilton, you know, he put his trophy down after being presented with it because he knew it was a load of rubbish and he didn't spray any water or whatever it was there. Because, you know, I think that Lewis knew what an absolute pile of rubbish it was. And he was absolutely right not to celebrate in it or participate in a podium ceremony. Gotta give Lewis Hamilton credit. Thank goodness he didn't. Although, to be fair, though, being the most famous driver on the grid, he knows he's going to get flack if he behaves in a certain way. And, you know, Formula 1 really has got to ditch its 2-lap minimum rule. Just a ridiculous rule. We need to have a 30% minimum race distance in order to implement half points. I know some would say maybe we could give out points if, you know, we only had 2 laps completed between like 2 and 30% race distance, but I really do not think that any points should be given out. Maybe you could give, I don't know, 3 points out for a win, 2 for second, and 1 for third place like you do in a sprint race, but even that's quite questionable, to be honest, because for me it's got to be at least 30% race distance to declare a result. I mean, anything less than that, I think no result should be declared. That's just farcical, really. Just a 2-lap minimum rule is a pile of rubbish. What on earth are we playing at? And yeah, I'm now going to look at a set of rules written out somewhere. Of course, you know, I've gone through all the things like whether we could run a race on a Monday like they do in America. Mate, this is an international championship. We're talking about marshals have jobs. They don't get paid. They're volunteers. And all the photographers themselves have got all the things to do. In the F1 sporting regulations, Article 6.5 states, if a sprint qualifying session or race is suspended under Article 50 and cannot be resumed, no points will be awarded if the leader has completed 2 laps or less. Half points will be awarded if the leader has completed more than 2 laps but less than 75% of the original sprint qualifying session or race distance. And 4 points will be awarded if the leader has completed 75% or more of the original sprint qualifying session or race distance. And Article 51.14 states if sprint qualifying or the race cannot be resumed, the results will be taken at the end of the penultimate lap before the lap during which the signal to suspend sprint qualifying or the race was given. I mean, in simple terms, it means that with the red flag coming out on lap 3, then the results were taken at the end of lap 1. I mean, that's the other problem. Of course, the other contrary, of course, the fact that we had the results declared after 1 lap, but yet everyone a lot of people interpret the regulations as meaning 2 full laps completed. That's another problem with the FIA's regulations. It's just so ambiguous. Like, I know Michael Massey came out saying that there's been 3 laps completed, the 3rd lap was completed as the car crossed the control line in the fast lane, and then classifications for points is taken on the penultimate lap before the signal was given. So I mean, we're just, honest to God, I could carry on talking, but I really don't know where to go with this video because there's just so much.